If you have played any mainline Sims game outside of The Sims 4, I think you'll agree with me when I say that there's something about The Sims 4 which makes it feel different to those which have come before it. Some players might say it lacks the quirkiness of the older games, the open feel, the level of customization, the spontaneity, the rich gameplay, that distinctly Sims je ne sais quoi. But that's just some players. Me, well, I agree with all of them. So anyway, around 18 months ago, I posted a video in which I compared The Sims 3 and The Sims 4, and recently I was scrolling back through the comments on that video and I came across an interesting one which really got me thinking. I'll throw it up on the screen here, and I recommend you pause to read the whole thread. However, I'm going to paraphrase some of Tori's most prominent points, these being that The Sims 4 seemed to undergo a reset or reboot of sorts, in which the devs wanted to maintain a more lighthearted feel in contrast to the games which preceded the series' fourth iteration. Within this, while there are some familiar returning characters like the Goth household, they have largely been stripped of any previously established backstory. They've been cutified. Because of these reasons, The Sims 4 cannot or should not be compared to previous games in the main Sims series. In this video, I aim to break down this idea and build on it, and ultimately I come to a conclusion which I bet a few long-term fans of the Sims franchise will agree with me on. So let's start right at the top. Tori posits that The Sims 4 appears to be a reboot for the series. What exactly does this mean? A reboot of a series usually indicates that it's been restarted or revived. It's had new life breathed into it, as it were. So what evidence is there to suggest that The Sims 4 is a reboot of the main Sims series? Well, Tori does mention that many familiar faces in the Sims universe, particularly Bella Goth for example, have been cleansed of what Tori describes as their more controversial backstory. All the lore and history which has been built up for these Sims, and The Sims 4 has quite literally been wiped away. I will also say that for Bella Goth, until very recently, pretty much for the first 7.5 years of her life in The Sims 4, even her very physical being had quite literally been whitewashed, but that's a deep dive for another day. Moving on. Bella Goth has always been an iconic character in the Sims series, but this especially became the case after the Sims 2 era, when the true mystery of her story came to the fore, because it's at this point where she just goes missing. She was last seen on the deck of local heartthrob Don Lothario, who in The Sims 2 was in fact engaged to Bella's daughter Cassandra, and not as we see in The Sims 4, where he is living with the Caliente household. I'm gonna interject here for another brief aside. The Calientes also got done dirty by this whitewashing in The Sims 4, and the Sims team have pretty much retconned this family by giving Dina and Nina a brand new mum. That's right, Katrina Caliente is not the mother of these two in previous Sims games. Please explain this to me, devs. Going back to The Sims 2, Bella Goth is straight up missing, but she can be found in the Goth family tree, and she can also be seen in the memories of Don Lothario when you boot up a new save. Very mysterious. There are multiple theories relating to what happened to Bella, including her potentially being abducted by aliens, or maybe even that she was harmed by another family, namely the aforementioned Nina and Dina Caliente, in order for them to get to her husband Mortimer Goth, presumably for money. Bella's grave can be found in the Sims 3 town of Luna Lakes, which has been confirmed to exist at around the same time as Pleasant View in The Sims 2, where she went missing. Now, if all of this timeline switching nonsense is killing your head, fear not. Let's rewind and explain. The Sims 3 chronologically is meant to be the earliest game in the main Sims game timeline, followed by the first Sims, then The Sims 2. This change over time can perhaps best be tracked by the evolutions in long-standing households which we are familiar with. I'll continue using the Goth household just for ease here. In The Sims 3, which again is chronologically the earliest game, we can see Mortimer Goth as a child living with his parents Gunther and Cornelia Goth. Then the also young Bella Bachelor is living with her parents Simis and Jacosta Bachelor. In the first Sims game, Bella and Mortimer have grown up and are together, and they have their first child Cassandra Goth. In The Sims 2, again, Bella is missing from the household, but by this point Mortimer is an elder, Cassandra has grown up to an adult, and we can see that sometime before her disappearance, Bella and Mortimer had another kid, who is Alexander Goth. He's a child at this point. So you may be asking, where does this leave The Sims 4? Back in 2014, The Sims 4 was confirmed by Sim Guru Sarah to be on an alternate timeline, which is entirely separate to the previous games. So basically take all of that batshit crazy lore and throw it out the window because none of it matters anymore. And it's within this alternate timeline nonsense that a further reason as to why The Sims 4 should be probably viewed as a reboot to the series rather than a continuation to the previous Sims games lies, in my opinion. So I'll say here really quick that if you're interested in seeing how the different Sims games and worlds fit together, the Sims fandom has pulled together an amazing page which gives a chronological order to all of this. So definitely check it out. It does also note on there a potential in-game reason for why The Sims 4 is on an alternate timeline, and they note that this may be because someone was tinkering around with the time machine introduced in The Sims 3 Ambitions expansion pack, but this is entirely speculation and fan theory. This does lead us though to question why exactly The Sims 4 may occupy this reboot status, why it takes place in an alternate timeline to the previous games, and why on earth the devs have essentially thrown away all of this plump and juicy lore, which was built over 13 years and 3 mainline titles. While this is just my own speculation, I think that the fact that The Sims 4 initially started as Project Olympus may play a big role in all of this. Now, if you're not familiar with Project Olympus, this was the game which The Sims 4 was originally intended to be. It was going to be an online multiplayer Sims game, but due to the community's poor response to the online-only SimCity released in 2013, among other things, developers were pushed to pivot direction, and so they converted the project into the single-player experience we have today. If all of this sounds a little bit tinfoil hat conspiracy-esque to you, a number of screenshots from work on Project Olympus were leaked by developers, and from these images we can see a number of assets which were clearly saved from the dumpster fire and repurposed for what would become The Sims 4. Looking into more specifically why The Sims 4 occupies a different timeline or an alternate universe, I went digging through old forum threads to see what the wider Sims community had to say about all of this, and I'll say that the outlook was mostly pretty bleak. According to that 2014 tweet from SimGuru Sarah, which I mentioned earlier, putting The Sims 4 in an alternate universe was the most flexible way to keep all of our favourite Sims in the game. The community seemed largely skeptical about this, with some players viewing this as an excuse to cover up the rushed development process. Again, maybe due to its shift from Project Olympus. This sentiment, which seemed to be shared by a lot of the community, is definitely not surprising when we consider the bare bones state in which The Sims 4 was released back in 2014, but that's a video for a whole nother day. This comment in particular from a player called Freezer Bunny Cowplan caught my eye because it mentioned a video of the beta version of The Sims 3, in which an adult Bella Goth can be seen. And because we see her as an adult, here it suggests that the devs went in to change up the lore and storytelling later in development. Again, if we remember from earlier in The Sims 3, Bella Goth is in fact Bella Bachelor and she's a child. So it's definitely strange to see her as an adult in the beta version of the game. This commenter then speculates that it's these later changes in detail made in The Sims 3 and the lack thereof in The Sims 4, which again further points to The Sims 4's rushed development. I went and found this video. I'll have the whole thing linked below, but we can definitely see a Sim here who looks strikingly like the Bella Goth that we see in The Sims 1 and 2. However, the fact that we can't see her name anywhere on screen means we can't 100% confirm that it was her. Side note, isn't it super interesting to see what the early UI looked like for The Sims 3? I will also note that I couldn't find any official statements from developers which confirmed that lore changes like these were made later in production, so while it's an interesting observation, let's remember to take this comment with a cautious pinch of speculative salt. This sentiment regarding the reason for the alternate timeline in The Sims 4 is also echoed on the Sims fandom site, where it cites that, quote, "Another theory is that the developers simply forgot about the original timeline or had no time to properly continue the lore," end quote. Importantly though, it should definitely be noted that there is no reference cited for this quote. So overall, as much as us fans may speculate, we will probably never know the true reason for why The Sims 4 is on this alternate timeline. I would like to put forward the notion that in the wider life cycle of The Sims 4, it was not just the transformation from Project Olympus that has set the game out as separate from its predecessors. Compared to previous iterations of the main Sims games, The Sims 4 has actively been worked on and added to via DLC for a really long time. The first Sims game, released in February of 2000, had a gap of around 4.5 years before The Sims 2 was released in September of 2004. The Sims 2 and 3 lasted for around about 5 years each, while The Sims 4 on the other hand is days away from being 8 years old. It's disgusting to think about how many different stages of my life I've lived through while playing this game. Anyway, let's save the existential crisis for later and talk cold, hard cash, because I don't doubt that it's been the financial success of The Sims 4 which has kept it in active development for so long. Back in 2019, the entire Sims franchise surpassed $15 billion in lifetime sales, and according to EA's 2021 fiscal year financial results, The Sims 4 back then had, quote, delivered its 6th consecutive year of franchise growth, end quote. However, I couldn't see any praise being sung for the game in the latest fiscal year report from EA. So basically, the game has made and will continue to make EA a butt ton of money, and if there's one thing we all know EA loves, it's money. I am going to sidestep away from talking about money and The Sims 4 for now, because we all know that this game has had incredibly aggressive monetization behind it, especially with kits in more recent years. That's an entirely different topic, so let's just move on. It's definitely worth noting that back in 2019, Sim Guru Frost made the famous or infamous tweet where they noted that The Sims 4 will be supported for many more years, and I came across an April 2021 GameIndustry.biz article which interviewed Katharina Lavers Mallet, who at the time had just become the new general manager of The Sims at Maxis. In this article, she said, quote, "Folks in the industry used to talk about having successful games that could live for 5 years. Now we talk about them lasting 10 years, 15 years or more. There's been a shift across the entire gaming industry to support and nurture our communities long term, and we're committed to doing just that with The Sims 4, end quote. Whoa, fellow Simmers, hoping for The Sims 5 to come out anytime soon. If that did not scare the crap out of you, I do not know what will. I want to move on now to address the point which Tori made about how the developers supposedly aimed to make The Sims 4 more lighthearted than previous games. And while I couldn't find any specific tweets, quotes, or article interviews to support this, I think that we don't have to look too far in-game to see the evidence of this subtle shift. The first thing we quite literally see is the cartoonish aesthetic of the game, which in my opinion feels like a big step back from The Sims 3. Don't get me wrong, I don't hate the art style in The Sims 4, I just prefer the slightly more realistic take that The Sims 3 took. But anyway, I believe a big reason they went with this visual style seen in The Sims 4, as well as entirely cutting out open worlds, was due to the devs striving to optimize the game so that it could run better on lower end machines, a goal which was noted in this 2013 Digital Spy article. There is a certain element of irony here though, as Ryan Vaughan, who was being interviewed, noted that they wanted to, quote, cut down on loading screens, end quote. Given that if you plan on leaving your home lot at all in The Sims 4, you have to endure loading screens. And as time has gone on and as people have added more packs to their game, players have reported these loading screens to be getting longer and longer. This interview seems to have aged as gracefully as milk. And to be honest, the game generally seems to not be running the best anymore, with many players creating and posting mods to fix simulation lag issues. But for the 4th time, I think that's a discussion for another video. Perhaps now would be a good time to start a drinking game for every time I start going down a rabbit hole, which probably requires its own video to discuss. Only water, of course. You might have noticed the Yasmin's Corner dark mode update to the aesthetic on the channel, but I'll have you know that this is a pure corner of the internet. The other way which The Sims 4 has been made more lighthearted is the lack of the return of old characters with more dubious backstories, the wiping away or lack of acknowledgement of the more questionable backstories of characters who have returned, again like Bella Goth, or I guess the lack of additions of new households with mysteries which players are drawn into unraveling. To be fair to the devs though, it's difficult to pinpoint exactly why there was this removal or avoidance to bring back these previously introduced story features. It could have been them wanting to take the game in this new, more light-hearted direction, or as many fans have speculated, it could have been due to their laziness, but I think that's a little bit of a harsh take. I reckon it's mainly probably a time crunch issue from switching from Project Olympus, or there are potentially many other reasons we're just not aware of. Again, we'll probably just never know. While trawling through the forums as I was writing this video, I came across a few players saying that they thought The Sims 4 was more of a kid-friendly experience than previous Sims games. And I think this definitely connects the aesthetic of the game compared to previous iterations, as well as the lack of any more interesting or rogue storylines that have been established in the previous games. The Sims 4 may be rated teen like other Sims games, but like I said right back at the start of this video, it just feels different. And at times more like a game for kids, which I know probably sounds like a strange comment, so hang with me here. If you compare the more adult elements of The Sims 3 to those in The Sims 4, the sense of this stripping back continues. One commenter on The Sims 4 made a good point of comparing the fact that we could make nectar in The Sims 3 while only being able to fizz juice in The Sims 4. In The Sims 3, you would crush grapes with your feet, as you may do when making wine in real life. In The Sims 3, you could literally dance on tables and get what felt like a lot more rowdy. While later Sims expansion packs in The Sims 4 have added some more raunchy woohoo animations, the catered for older players elements feels more or less gone. And when I say this, I do understand that it's a game for young people, and that being rated teen, it means that it of course must be appropriate for this age group. I don't want this to be some wild game like GTA or something. Of course, I want it to be a chill Sims game. But I think that what I'm trying to get at here is best summarised by this comment on the screen right now. I agree with this player. The old games were put out in different times when what was considered appropriate for younger audiences, I guess, was just different. The vibe now just feels a lot more childish and more watered down, I suppose. I don't know, it's just funny for me to think back to even the spin-off older games in the wider Sims series, namely The Sims 2 DS, which was rated PEGI 7, so for kids. It had so much more humour which could be enjoyed by an older audience, but which would go over the heads of younger players. Think a la Shrek. So overall, I think that The Sims 4 has been done dirty, which is ironic because it has been sanitized of many of the aspects which make it specifically a Sims game, as opposed to a generic life simulation. The quirks, the customization, the story, and the interesting characters gone, all in favour of a much more bland and flat experience which, no matter how much more DLC content is added, still largely fails to keep older and more long-term players like myself entertained for a substantial amount of time. This is especially concerning when considering the earlier comment from Catherine Lavers Mallet about wanting to maintain the game and notably the community for 10, 15 or more years. Ultimately, I think this player summed up my thoughts on this topic pretty well, particularly relating to the way that the game is tailored or not to older players outside of the teen bracket. A job listing for a senior game designer at Maxis, which came out last year, even pointed to the fact that around 60% of the player base of The Sims 4 is mainly comprised of women between the ages of 18 and 24. So most of the player base is not even teens or children. Going back to the comment from Tori Goth, which started my journey down the rabbit hole for this entire video, I think I agree with the notion that The Sims 4 is a reboot and so can't be compared to previous Sims games to an extent. I think that if the devs did not intend for this game to be the next iteration in the mainline Sims series, regardless of whether it started as Project Olympus, they would not have called it The Sims 4. But thinking from a very personal and unobjective position, I think I would just rather consider The Sims 4 as something separate from the previous games. While I have not yet had the chance to play The Sims or The Sims 2, I played a whole lot of The Sims 3 and it holds a very special place in my heart. It has so much more lore and deep stories, and I love learning about Easter eggs and secrets and connection behind The Sims in that game even now. The Sims 4, in my opinion, represents the sanitization of the Sims series. It has been watered down to a much more shallow, kid-friendly experience, and it sometimes neglects to cater to players who want to play a world for a long time, which in theory should be all, or at least most of us, given how long the devs seem to be committing to keeping this game going. Given that I've quite literally written a list of 100 ways The Sims 4 could be improved to address these issues, which will hopefully become a video of its own one day, here is probably a good time to end this video. So I think that's about all I've got for you guys today. Thank you so much to Tori Goth for posting this comment. Hopefully this video will make up for the fact that I forgot to heart your comment and respond to it when you initially made it a year ago. I'd love to know what you guys think about this topic. I had a great time diving into all of this. If there's something you'd like to add or that you think I missed, please drop it down below because I'd love to hear from you. But with that said, I hope you're having a great day and I'll see you again soon.